We'll kick off with our academic panel, perspective on AI and personalization. We'll keep our fluid discussion moving. I'd like to welcome our distinguished panel, starting with Garrett Johnson, Associate Professor of Marketing. Garrett's a researcher, frequent speaker on digital advertising, privacy, and advertising effectiveness. Examines online display ad effectiveness using large-scale experiments to measure how and how much ads work. Very practical work that he does. His privacy research quantifies the value of online behavioral targeting and impact on privacy regulation. He's proud to say he works with our Digital Business Institute on privacy research and sandbox research, and it's very exciting what he does. Nina is coming in from Zoom. Thank you for joining. Nina, Professor of Marketing here at Questrom. Before that, Nina was an Assistant Associate Professor of Marketing at the University of Toronto, Rotman School, where she was also the co-originator and co-director of BEAR, Behavioral Economics in Action at the Rotman Center. Nina has been named one of the 40 most outstanding B-School profs under 40 in the world in 2014. I'm sure you're still under 40. With her focus on behavioral science and economics, she investigates consumer behavior and how it deviates from standard economic assumptions. In addition, she studies moral decision-making and its implications for policy. And last but not least, Kaye, joining us from MIT. Sloan Initiative in the Digital Economy, which we admire very much from here. His interests include industrial organization, digital economics, AI, and health. His research examines questions related to consumer search, platform design, and the value of information and market power. So welcome all. Why don't we start with just some opening statements about your work, about your passions.
Advertising effectiveness and privacy. Really found the opening keynote to be inspiring, to think about how marketing is changing. Our frameworks for marketing of the 4 Ps and of segmentation, targeting, and positioning, I mean, they're still valuable, but just hearing more about how personalization and use of MarTech and use of data is transforming marketing, I find very exciting as someone that comes from more of a data background. I think this came up in the discussion, but we have a challenge, I think, as a society between our desire for privacy and at the same time wanting all this personalization that David was talking about. And I think the regulators wrestle with this quite a lot. So when I participate and consume regulatory discussions, there's a lot more concern about harm to consumers from this and so-called surveillance advertising or surveillance capitalism. And I think that's interesting to contrast with what David was saying, right? David's saying, don't find out everything you can about your consumers, you can go screw them. Like no, you want to get to know your consumers so you can be in a relationship with your consumers so that you can generate value for them. And it's interesting because when you hear about firms from regulators, they say, well, maybe firms are not providing the optimal amount of privacy. And I think what you take from the last discussion is that firms are trying to serve customer needs. And that includes a variety of things. That includes privacy for sure, but it also includes surprising and delighting consumers and providing value to them. So it's not that firms are trying to just run roughshod over consumers' privacy. They're trading off what they think is in their best interests and also what's in their consumers' best interests in order to try to balance these two things. And I think one of the things we struggle with as a society is again this tension in our minds between wanting to live in a data-driven society and a data-driven economy while at the same time wanting absolute privacy. Firms are not running roughshod over that, they're negotiating that. And I think we're also negotiating that. And the balance is struck in a way that and I think the story needs to be told more, that does benefit consumers as well. So I'll leave that as my opening remarks. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. One of the things that so I will be joining Boston University starting this fall. So I'm really excited to be here ahead of time, but I'll be here very shortly as well. So I think Garrett already spoke to some of this before. On the policy side of things, we think of an efficiency versus privacy trade-off when we think about personalization. My own research kind of ignores the privacy side of things, and I think Garrett can speak to that much more, and focuses on the efficiency side. So what are the sources of efficiency? And we heard some of this today. It's that people can find products that better fit their tastes. There can be so many products in the market that it's really costly for consumers to find something and make a decision. So there are savings in terms of their time and effort before finding a match. And then longer term, we can also think about what's called the long tail effect, which is it can create a market for niche goods that might not otherwise be able to exist. And it can impact the entry and survival of other firms. So those are all things that say personalization can be good. It can be quite efficient. Some of my research says, hold on, maybe the efficiency side isn't just completely this like unanimously good thing. And it's that I think there might be something missing from some of the research, which is some of the longer term impacts. Where in a lot of these areas where we think about personalization, there are these online platforms. So like I have research on Expedia, ZocDoc, Yelp, places like that, where you have a two-sided market. And in a two-sided market, you have people like consumers like us when we're searching, for example, for a hotel, but you also have strategic third-party sellers. So for example, on Expedia, Expedia doesn't set prices, hotels set prices. When you're shopping on Instacart, Instacart doesn't set prices. Third-party grocery stores and restaurants set prices. And one of the things that's missing is how if you personalize for everyone, the pricing strategy might change for these strategic third-party sellers. And so what I find in my paper on Expedia is that as you personalize, third-party sellers are able to take advantage of the better algorithm and set higher prices, and this can more than entirely erode some of the gains you would get from personalization. Now, I think that there's still like room to kind of improve this by making recommendation systems more sensitive to price. This is also the kind of thing that industry might miss, because one of the things that struck me when I was reading the book is it talks about experimenting and learning quickly. And how do these experiments work? They work through small A/B tests or small multivariate tests where a small set of consumers get the new algorithm. The thing is, when a small set of consumers sees the new algorithm and you're trying to learn about whether this is promising or not, it's not providing an incentive for strategic sellers to change their behavior yet. But once you launch it for everyone, then they're going to adjust their behavior. They'll set higher prices and things like that. But meanwhile, if you're running 1 million of these tests at the same time, it's kind of hard to back this out after the fact. I'll stop there.
That's certainly something we should come back to.
Nina, oh, sorry. Delayed mic, I apologize. But Nina, would you like to say some opening remarks?
Yes. So thank you very much for having me. And I apologize that I'm only here over the screen. So I am more of a consumer psychologist. So unlike the other two panelists here, my background is not in quantitative marketing, but it's rather in understanding how we humans make decisions, understanding how we very often do not behave as standard economics would like us to behave. So we can be influenced by the context, by the people that are with us, and by all kinds of things. And I'm particularly fascinated with how all these insights are now maybe changing or not with the advent of AI, because from an AI human interaction perspective, there are, I think, lots of interesting things that companies need to be aware of. So I'm doing currently some research with colleagues at the Questrom IS department, so information systems, on the adoption of AI tools. So on the one hand, we see that now that we have OpenAI, Claude, and all these other AI agents, lots of us engage with them on a daily basis. But yet, when we look at managers, we actually observe that managers don't really adopt AI decision-making tools that much yet in their daily decision-making, especially when it's about risky or uncertain decisions that they have to make. So I've been working on, well, how do we create that trust to adopt these type of AI decision aids? What stands in the way? And seeing and exploring basically how should we open that black box to improve the trust, and after then having the trust and increasing also the adoption of those tools, when it's very clear that if managers would adopt those type of tools, that their decisions would be much, much better. So that is like one whole line of research. But also when it comes to personalization, so much of my work has been really thinking about how can we nudge consumers to make better decisions, to be better informed, and so on. So I've been working a lot also with various policymakers, but also with companies. And traditionally, what we have been doing is we would do some A/B tests or some experiments to see what type of nudges really work best to convince consumers or get consumers to behave in one way versus another way. And then we would just apply on average whatever on average was the best performing intervention. We would apply that. And now with the advent of random forests and algorithms and whatnot, we have been now experimenting with personalized nudging of consumers, and we have seen some tremendous upside. So, for example, in the context of getting people to get their flu shots, we have been able to show that if we use personalization to learn which type of nudge interventions works best for what type of a consumer, we were able to increase the effectiveness of these type of nudges twofold to even 3 times the effectiveness. So very, very strong effects there. But that's like a whole different area of research. And then I'm really very much also interested, as we see more and more AI agents that are on platforms selling to consumers. We also see that these type of agents can take advantage of the knowledge that they have of consumers and deceive the consumers when they try to sell their products. So I've been working with various colleagues trying to figure out how can we design platforms better to make markets where we have AI agents more efficient and less deceptive, so that consumers are more protected and that the markets are more efficient. And I can go on and go on and go on. So
Thank you, Nina. That's a great setup. So if I could, I'll ask to dig into a couple themes that we just started with. Aaron and Nina, you both sort of hit on the efficiency, delivered by personalization, or the efficiency of personalization. Maybe start with you, Aaron. Back to your point, you talked about the focus on efficiency. Can you unpack that a little bit more and go a little deeper?
Sure. So I'm going to narrow it down to think about kind of online platforms where we might have a recommendation system or an AI that's helping consumers make decisions. So the efficiency gain comes from, we're of course talking about personalization, so people are different and have different tastes. We can have a market where there are hundreds or thousands of potential products in a market, and even within one product, there might be a bunch of different versions. So personalization can really help people find the product that really fits their taste or is kind of the best option for them, that without personalization they might not have been able to find, or it'd be really costly for them to find. So a lot of the times we think of the journey from starting a search to finding a product as quite costly, of like often in the data we observe like clicks or dwell times, but we can think that there's some cognitive burden or there's some value of time that people are giving up when they're making these decisions, and that can be a source of efficiency as well. So that's the efficiency gain, I think, in this area, and that's the short run efficiency. Of course, you also have some longer run efficiencies of like which products are offered in the market, and if an algorithm has enough influence that it actually creates an incentive for different products to enter the market, that can be another source of efficiency where consumers end up better off from personalization being around.
I have a quick follow-up. Where does the Elvis Hotel fit into your story?
Yeah. So I've been presenting this paper recently, and I think Garrett has been lucky enough to see it like 5 times at this point. So the Elvis Hotel is this fictional example I have of like, imagine that there's this one niche good, it's an Elvis-themed hotel, and you only have 2 types of consumers in the market. Your very common, typical online shopper, and then these huge Elvis fans. And the idea is if you have a recommendation system that's not personalized, who's gonna see the Elvis Hotel when they're shopping? It'll be mostly these typical online shoppers and only the very occasional huge Elvis fan. However, if you personalize, then you're gonna send a bunch of the Elvis fans towards the Elvis Hotel, and that's the source of the efficiency gain. Now, the other thing I do point out is that the pricing decision of the Elvis Hotel is gonna depend on who sees it. So in the case where we're not personalized, we have many typical online shoppers, they would typically choose, you would expect them to choose a much lower price than they would if it's a bunch of Elvis fans who are seeing the hotel. And so that highlights this tension between we have this efficiency gain of better matches, but we also have higher prices in the market. And that's a trade-off that can end up becoming quite ambiguous in terms of whether consumers at least are better off with personalization.
It's very evocative, thank you.
And I've heard you discuss that before. Higher prices could be good for the sellers, maybe not good for the consumers, right? So what's the social welfare net maybe is the question, or do we know yet?
I mean, I think I'm gonna give the disappointing answer of it depends. So
Well, you're an economist, so you have
have
to
a
say.
PhD in economics?
it depends. So in my research setting where it's data from Expedia, I find that total welfare, so the consumers end up losing about twice as much as the hotels are gaining. The hotels, in that case, do gain about 5% in profit, so there is a gain to them. The other thing worth pointing out is that like who would be the decision maker in this case? It would be Expedia, and they end up no better off because they get a % cut of revenue, and they would be deploying what looks like, if you hold prices fixed, a great algorithm. But because prices erode the quantity sold, they're ending up with the same kind of amount of business happening on the platform as they would
Wonderful.
without it.
And back to Nina.
So actually, may I ask a question as well? So I'm actually wondering, and this is a question for Aaron. So where do you see this going as it is being predicted that consumers are going to use more and more actually agents to do the search for them for products and items? So if I use an AI agent to search for me and come up with products for me, to what extent can companies really continue doing personalization? Like, what are they really then learning? In what way will we be really learning about the consumer versus about the agents? And will maybe the agents that are helping the consumers be able to maybe help them get better prices and a better match, and so that the power maybe that the sellers have or the platforms have is actually not that strong?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and there are a number of ways to think about it. So like right now, or at least as of like 2 years ago, platforms were designed for people shopping on them. As we have more and more of these so-called operator models where the AI is able to browse the internet and interact with it, you can imagine that we have versions of the internet that are built for AI to navigate, not for people to navigate, as we offload more and more of our decision making. In terms of like relating it back to this idea of efficiency versus price, it really depends on how the AI is trained, right? So you can imagine one version where it exacerbates it, where you kind of have these pre-trained models, and it has all this fixed information about the products in the market without live price data yet. And so it's gonna make a decision based on kind of some stale information when it's choosing like, oh, these are the 5 products we should look at. And then it might go online and see the new prices. And that's something where we might think it exacerbates kind of this trade-off between price and efficiency versus ones where it's able to explore many different options and take into account the price like at the moment in time, and there it might alleviate it some. But again, the maybe dissatisfying answer of it depends for which way things go. It's a good question.
So why don't we pivot from efficiency and personalization to privacy? Garrett, why don't we start with you? Personalization is great. What about privacy? We saw David speak about his research that showed there's a mounting backlash to some personalization, perhaps. What are your thoughts there? What kind of research are you doing around it?
Yeah, so what I think is really exciting, certainly captivated my interest, is this concept of privacy-enhancing technologies. And basically what this is saying is that we can have our cake and eat it too. We can have privacy, we can have personalization at the same time. So let me give you an example of this. So we are all burdened by these devices with us. We use them to type. We use features like next word prediction to make our lives easier. But if you think about this, you probably don't want like everything you're typing into your phone to go to Google, right? To go to a server at Google. That would be extremely creepy. In fact, like I'm getting anxious just even suggesting that notion. And so what Google actually does is it uses what's a concept called federated learning, where it sends a model of how to do next word prediction and how to interpret your movements for typing words in locally to your phone. And as it learns, it will update that model and send that model back home to a Google server. And that's going to allow Google to do a better and better job of this over time. It's going to slow down the learning, but it's preventing all this data from going onto Google servers. So I think this is a case of a win-win-win. Now, what I'm studying actively is Google's privacy sandbox. So for those of you that haven't heard of this, you've probably seen, if those of us that don't block ads, we get very personalized ads, especially if we're still using a Chrome browser. And that's largely powered through third-party cookies, which is just an ID that allows marketers to follow you across websites. And what Google has proposed, as many other browsers have, is to get rid of these third-party cookies. The challenge, though, is that they provide a lot of value. They provide better targeted ads. They provide greater prices for advertising that helps fund content. And so what Google is saying, we're not just going to get rid of these things. We're going to try to replace these with privacy-enhancing technologies that allow us to somehow have our cake and eat it too. So one specific example of this is called Protected Audience API. And the notion of Protected Audience API is that like the way the market currently works is when you are seeing an ad, your third-party cookie ID gets shared with potentially dozens or hundreds of companies. It gets stored on some server somewhere. And this makes privacy people understandably very uncomfortable. And the notion of Protected Audience API is that instead, the way that you have personalized ads get stored on your device. There's an auction that's run on your device based on websites that you've previously visited, but that information never leaves your device. And so you, again, have your cake and eat it too. You get to see personalized ads based on the sites and the interests that you've shown in the past without this information living on servers somewhere. So I find these kinds of solutions, I'm happy to give more examples, to be really compelling examples of how we can do sort of the things that Dave was talking about in the first half, while minimizing the harm to, the even potential harm that could happen to consumers through privacy violations.
In that space?
Our other hire from last year, Shunto Kobayashi, is working on some of this research with me, and but there's not a lot of people working in this space for sure. I think it's really exciting. Certainly a lot of computer scientists are thinking about privacy-enhancing technologies and doing a great job developing those.
So maybe pivoting back to Nina from privacy to the outright deception, right, and the dishonesty of some digital marketing, digital content, news. I know you're working with the, what do we call it, the Truth Market Project, Nina, with others. Maybe you want to say a few words about that, or what's happening there related to, especially with AI and the implications.
Yeah, so maybe I first explain what the grand ideas that we are exploring. So at the end of the day, maybe it's also easier to take an example from the misinformation space. So so far, at least, we can just post whatever we want online, and we know that the type of news that is most likely to go viral is usually news and information that is not true, but that is very interesting, that is divisive, and so on. And when we looked at, okay, well, what kind of solutions are out there that platforms are toying with to help reduce the spread of misinformation, for example, we have seen that some platforms have engaged with fact checking. We have also seen that over the recent months, several platforms have moved away from that because they say, well, that could be biased. And so we see now a move to something that is called community notes, for example. But at the end of the day, what we have been thinking is, those kind of interventions can't be really that effective if one really wants to reduce the spread of misinformation, because they come after the fact. So the information is already out there, has already had a lot of impact, and so the way how we were thinking about it was really, well, right now, if I am polluting the world with misinformation, I don't really have any repercussions. There are no costs that I have to incur. In fact, it's you, the consumers of that information. You need to find ways to figure out that information is false. So we thought, well, what if we now change it and we make it so that the person or the people, the organizations, the agents that are putting information out there, that they have to be liable for the information that they put out there. Now, maybe that would make them be more careful when they think about what to put out. And so in very concrete terms, what have we been thinking of? So imagine when I share a piece of misinformation, I actually have the option to just share it, or I have the option to say that I am warranting that the content that I'm sharing is true. Now, I don't have to do that. I can still, as before, I can just put something out there, share it, that's it. But if I want to emphasize or show to the world that what I'm putting out there, that I'm backing that, then I can say, okay, well, I will self-certify this is true, and I have to put money where my mouth is. So I will have to put some money into, let's say, some amount of escrow. And by the way, this doesn't have to be money. It can also be coins, tokens, as you have it, for example, on Reddit. But if I do that, then somebody else who sees this information can also challenge anything that I warranted if they believe that this is not true. And if they want to challenge this, they also have to put some money, tokens, or whatever up there, and then that money is being used to then find out what is true or who's saying the truth, and if it turns out that I have warranted something that is actually not true, and I lose my money or the token is true, then I get it back. And we have tried this kind of mechanism. We've simulated that now in various experiments, and we find that this type of platform design is reducing the spread of misinformation. It is increasing the sharing of true information, and also on the receivers, on the consumer side, that are seeing information that is put out there, they start also having more trust in the platform on which they are, and also also in the agents that are sharing information. So we compare this to reputation systems, and we see that this is superior. And now we have started to take this type of idea of this warranting type of mechanism. We are using this now and testing it in a market setting. So imagine you are on Amazon, where you're buying something from somebody, and where we offer to the agents that are putting out an ad that they are selling an item, we are offering them the ability to also warrant that their claims that they're putting out there in the market are true. And we're seeing that that actually makes the markets much more efficient. They work better than just having the typical reputation systems that we have right now. And then as a third step, we have extended that now to play around with what happens if we have a typical reputation system as we have it right now on Amazon, and where you now have a few AI agents that are operating and selling items to consumers, and compare that to a market that has our warranting mechanism added to the reputation system, and see how these AI agents, how do they behave in one market, so the reputation market versus the one with the warrants, how much deception do we have there, what is happening to the products that consumers are buying, are they better, and so on. And what we find is that in our warrants market, AI agents are behaving much more truthful, and consumers are less likely to be deceived. So the welfare is increasing, the market efficiency is increasing. While in reputation markets, we have various simulations where we see that AI agents are pretty good at understanding very quickly after a few rounds how they can get away with deceiving consumers and selling them items of lower quality.
Example of governance, right, in the AI generation of content and some models for that. But it makes me think, Aaron, and perhaps the answer is no, but is there a line between this type of warrants and governance of efficacy of the or truthfulness of the information to your work around recommendations and consumer belief and response to those?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. So one of the things, and this is like an aspect of some of my research, is that like I tend to think of recommendation systems as AI, like there's some algorithm making a decision, and those algorithms have access to much more information than what the consumer does looking at the screen when they're making their choice. So if you're shopping on an online platform, you might see an assortment on the first page of like 35 products, and if you're on your phone, an even smaller amount. You might only see a few of the product features. Now imagine that you're shopping for a hotel and it's in a market you've never been to before. Why would you know that much about the products in the market? Well, what you do know is that the algorithm has access to all of the product features. So for the set of products that appear on your screen, you know that if you click, you'll learn about a whole lot more product features. But the algorithm already knows about those. And also, there are a lot of products that it chose not to show you, and it knows about all the product features that are there. And so we can think of recommendation systems also as a reputation system. They're a signal to consumers of how promising each product might be when they're deciding which ones do I want to spend my time learning more about before I ultimately make a decision. Now, in the short run, if you're trying to test a new recommendation system through, for example, an A/B test, you run into this problem, right? Because the consumers, when they're in an A/B test, don't know they're being experimented on. And so their behavior when they're interacting with the algorithm might be based on their experience from the last few times they've interacted with it, right? On some equilibrium beliefs. And so you might miss kind of some of the long-term impacts of changing the algorithm. Because once you change it for everyone, then they'll get to actually learn it and they'll update their behavior at some point based on knowing, oh, this is a new recommendation system, this is more personalized, or maybe the recommendation system for some reason became worse, and then update their behavior a bit more in the long run. And this is, again, the tension of, like, we can run many small experiments and we can learn a lot, but there are going to be these long-term changes in consumer behavior and, to what I was talking about earlier, seller behavior that we'll miss out on. Now, I do think the many small experiments is like a very valid way to do it, because like you get to learn so much and you get to move so quickly, but what we're losing is this kind of longer term impact, because consumers are at some point going to update their behavior about how they're interacting with these reputation systems or recommendation systems, and sellers will also update their behavior as well.
Questions? And we have 5 books left. Whoever wants to ask. Did you already get a book? Okay.
Hello, hello. So I've had to relitigate my relationship with privacy probably like multiple times. I went from being very protective to shy to very open, and now with AI, maybe back to being a little shy. I'm curious to get your perspectives, like outside of me, but like the broader consumer base, user base. What's the temperature in the room? How have attitudes shifted? What's the current state? And also if there's any like generational, like what generation alpha, what do you anticipate their appetite's gonna be with privacy?
So I can talk a little bit about that, and actually Pete has some great data that talks about this. I think a general feature of privacy behavior is that young people tend to be less protective of their privacy than older people. And it's never entirely clear to me how much of that is just maybe the wisdom of old age versus maybe the differing experiences of people that are digital natives, internet natives, mobile phone natives, now, God help us, ChatGPT natives. So it's not entirely clear to me just where that is. I think we have, again, struggled to deal with this as a society. I think it's interesting to contrast us with Europe, where Europe put into law this regulation called the GDPR that's meant to improve privacy, and it has done a lot to change firms' behavior, and it's definitely created a lot of compliance costs for firms. What's challenging though is just, I mean, you're asking a very important but very difficult question, which is just how do consumers feel about this? And I think we have a pretty murky sense of that. And I guess when I think about this, I sort of take two perspectives. One is just a perspective of just humility. Like, we just don't know what's going on here, and it's very important. Consumers tell us that it's very important, and we need to respect that. But then another perspective is like, hey, this is something that everyone says is important. Typically, their behaviors are less, I mean, it seems like you are taking more privacy protective behaviors, but generally people are doing less investment in privacy protective products. And then we have this great big law that comes in that creates all this compliance costs for European society and worldwide. But then if you ask consumers, like, how do you think your privacy has improved? My sense is the answer is not much. And so that, I guess, begs the question, like, you know, is this good policy or not, right? If it's, I guess, if we think that there is this kind of iceberg underneath the water of consumers care a lot about their privacy, it's mysterious, then maybe we should think this is great policy. But if we think, you know, consumers aren't really changing their privacy perspectives and we're throwing a lot of money at this problem, you know, going back to what I was saying earlier, right? It's not saying that privacy isn't important. It's just that consumers and we as people are balancing many things. We're balancing convenience. We're balancing relationships. We're navigating our barriers about what information we're revealing to whom. And a policy that puts privacy as the #1 priority of society may not be the one that is optimal for society. Thanks for the great question.
Other questions? Yes.
I'm curious as to how dynamic the ad blocking software is in terms of providing refinements to options and things like that, and its role in terms of, you know, the ecosystem, so to speak, of privacy.
So I sort of am, and I'm not the expert on this. I always ask my students, do you block ads? And I teach digital marketing. And, you know, quite often, like 2/3 of the hands goes up. And I just have to say, like, oh, isn't that interesting? We're here in digital marketing. We're trying to get jobs in digital marketing. And we don't want to learn what our own industry is doing. So I personally don't block ads the vast majority of the time. But I know that that has been something that it had grown for quite rapidly, and then it kind of leveled off, at least in the United States. I think David gave us statistics of about 30% ad blocking rates. Now, one thing there is that often these ad blockers don't provide commensurate privacy benefits. So people think, like, I'm going to block ads and that's going to stop all tracking, but a lot of the tracking is happening in the background and not being blocked by these ad blockers. So you probably need a tracking blocker and an ad blocker to get that privacy benefit. Now, there's also some companies in the ad blocking space that try to take a more thread the needle a little bit more. Instead of just blocking all ads, they try to allow, they take the view that, what consumers are really objecting to is, maybe stuff that's privacy related, or maybe it's ads that are really belligerent and kind of pop up in your face and take over your computer. And so we're going to allow for the most basic ads without any animation, and we'll share some of the revenue back with the publishers for that. But that's always, I think, a challenging negotiation is how, do you get these people that say they hate ads to accept some amount of ads? And, AdBlock Plus, I think, is the platform that does this, and they manage to do so.
I have a question for Nina. Okay, now it's working. When someone warrants that something is true and somebody challenges that, how do you determine whether it is actually true or not? Like, I feel like part of what the problem is right now is people don't know what's true and what isn't true. Even take the Signal situation that we have right now, where some people are saying it's classified information and others are saying, no, this isn't classified. To my eye, it looks classified, but whatever. Okay, how do you do that?
Yeah, no. It's a very good question. It's a very fair question. Unfortunately, I'll have to give you an answer that is not very satisfying. We're not there yet. So we have this very, very basic idea of this mechanism, of whether it works. And we have been testing it in a lab setting, in a simulation setting, where we knew whether the information is 100% true or 100% wrong. But most of the damage out there in the world is being done by information that is either ambiguous, so it has a little bit of information that is true, a little bit of information that is not true, or information where we don't really know, right? So those will be the hard problems that we need to solve. So I don't really have an answer for you yet how we would solve this, but I'm hoping, like if you follow up with me in a year or so, that we do have some suggestions for that. So you could think of maybe something using the wisdom of the crowds, or just do some kind of a voting. So where we say, okay, well, there is maybe no objective truth. So let's maybe just use a voting mechanism to see what is the perception. So, but I don't know yet. We will have to think about that very, very carefully.
By the way, a slight plug, on Wednesday, April 2nd, Nina and I are participating in a webinar with Marshall Van Alstyne on this particular subject. So tune in for that. It's published on our website and through emails. So with that, why don't we ask for wrap-ups, final comments from the panel? Nina, would you like to start?
Sure. I think this is a fascinating area. I think it's very, very fast changing. So it really requires us as academics to be very much aware of what is happening in the industry, and we have to move very fast and work together with companies, as well as understanding consumers, where they are at and what they're really thinking and what they're feeling. And it's always challenging when thinking about things such as privacy, ethics, personalization, because as we also know from consumer behavior, how do you really assess what people think, right? In the moment where I'm asking you, well, how do you feel about sharing all this information? How do you feel about being tracked and whatnot? If I design the question in a particular way, I think I can pretty well succeed in getting a lot of people saying, oh, absolutely, it's the most important thing for me, and I'm very, very upset. But I can also design a question such that I get the opposite. It really also shows that I think people often do not know how they should think about these things, because there are positives and negatives in getting the personalized information, but also at the same time being tracked. So it's really about what is salient in their mind, how salient are these issues in their mind, how salient does society make it to them. So all I'm saying is it is a big challenge to even understand what people's needs are, and what they want. And that makes it exciting. That's why we're all here.
Wonderful. Aaron, final words?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me here. It's been great to be a part of this symposium. So I think what I'll say is that like firms definitely feel the pressure to create a better user experience and to innovate. So whether it's personalization or adopting different versions of AI, like they're competing, if they're in a two-sided market, they're competing for both sides of the market, and like they feel the pressure, they'll lose business if they're not pushing on this. I do think that as researchers and academics, part of it is our role to think about like outside of the individual business decision, what happens as the level of adoption overall changes. So this is part of why I think prices are something that are really important to keep track of as AI makes more and more consumer decisions.
And last but not least, Garrett.
Great. Well, thanks again for everyone for being here. I just wanted to tell a story that's kind of a bridge between the two keynotes. The first being about personalization, the upcoming one being about generative AI. So I have the privilege of teaching digital marketing and having a guest speaker who's the CTO of a Boston-based startup called Voicify. And they're a really interesting company. They started out as providing apps to voice devices. So if anybody has an Amazon Alexa or a Google Home, this feature didn't really take off, but you can start conversations not just generically with the Alexa device, but with actually brands. So you can say, you know, Volkswagen, tell me about the cars that you have, and it opens up a voice app. And they ended up pivoting to something very interesting, which is voice-based phone conversations. And so the first thing they started out with was restaurant ordering. So you can call the restaurant, and instead of talking to a human being, you would talk to a bot, and it would sound exactly like a human being and would walk you through the ordering process so you can take care of this. Now, I think this comes back to the story, this question that came up earlier, like what can I do as a small business? This is something that like any small business can do. And what it's functionally doing is that it's making it so that instead of having like one employee that you have to dedicate to the phones at all times, which is very hard because you know, if you're a restaurant, you have busy times during the day. You need that person making pizza, and that frees that person up. It also allows you to kind of quickly have best practices being put throughout your, every single phone call. So another really powerful example is using hardware stores. You know, we would want the perfect employee to know absolutely every product that's in your store and the exact inventory levels. But even the perfect employee doesn't have that. But if you empower an AI bot that listens to the consumer, converts that back into text, comes up with the exact response for that, converts that back into voice, has connected to the databases of the company that tells you, how many, A4 screws they have left in the color black. This is something that can be not just something that's good for firms, but tremendously beneficial for consumers to get their answer directly in as little time as possible. So with that, I'll stop and just say I'm really looking forward to the second keynote as well. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.